Hello, and welcome to Midnight Rituals, a place where the night unfolds slowly, wrapping you in stories that ease you toward sleep. If you've joined me before, it's nice to see you again. If this is your first time, come in and get comfortable. This is for anyone who lies awake, chasing rest through the quiet hours. Tonight, we have 20 tales ahead of us, each one dipped in shadows of horror, conspiracy, or myth, told in a way that pulls you in but lets you drift off when you're ready. I've kept the ads few and far between, just a handful after the first stories, so tonight stays yours. Imagine this, an old telephone ringing in an empty room, its sound cutting through the stillness, and no one knows who's on the other end. That's where we start, with a story that creeps in soft and slow like fog over a field. Settle down now. Picture yourself in a small house at the edge of nowhere and let the tale begin. It was late autumn in a town called Hollow Bend, a speck of a place where the trees outnumbered the people and the wind carried a chill that sank into your bones. Clara lived alone there, in a house her grandfather built, a simple thing with creaky floors and windows that rattled when the storms came. She liked the quiet, the way it wrapped around her like a shawl, but she kept an old rotary phone on the kitchen wall, its black cord coiled tight. It was a relic, something her grandfather insisted on even when the world moved to cell phones and wireless lines. Clara never used it much. Most folks in Hollow Bend didn't bother with landlines anymore, but she left it plugged in, its dial tone a faint hum she'd hear when she passed by. One night, as the leaves tapped against the glass and the sky turned a bruised purple, that phone rang. The sound was sharp, slicing through the silence, and Clara froze with a mug of tea halfway to her lips. She wasn't expecting a call. Her sister lived 2 states away and always texted first, and the few neighbors she had were the kind who knocked on your door, not dialed your number. The phone kept ringing, steady and patient, like it knew she'd answer eventually. Clara set her mug down, her slippers scuffing the floor as she crossed the kitchen. She stood there a moment, staring at it, the black plastic gleaming under the dim bulb overhead. Maybe it was a wrong number, she thought, or one of those machines selling something she didn't need. Her hand hovered over the receiver, and the ringing stopped, just for a second, before starting again, louder this time, insistent. She picked it up, pressed it to her ear, and said hello, her voice small against the hum of the line. At first, there was nothing, just a faint crackle, like leaves rustling far away, and then a voice came through low and soft, saying her name. Clara's breath caught. It wasn't a voice she knew, not her sister, not a friend, not anyone from town. It was a man's voice, smooth as water over stones, but it felt wrong, like it didn't belong on this side of the wire. "Who is this?" she asked, gripping the phone tighter, but the voice didn't answer her question. Instead it said, "Look out the window, Clara." And the line went quiet again, leaving only that crackle, steady and alive. She turned slow, her eyes sliding to the kitchen window, where the night pressed black against the glass. Nothing moved out there, just the sway of branches and the glint of frost. But she felt watched, like something was staring back from the dark. She told herself it was a prank, some kid with too much time, but her heart thudded hard, and her feet wouldn't move. The phone stayed silent in her hand, but she didn't hang up, not yet. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds, and then the voice came again, closer now, like it was leaning through the line. "Do you see it?" it asked, and Clara's skin prickled, a shiver running down her arms. She didn't want to look again, didn't want to give it the satisfaction, but her eyes drifted back to the window anyway. The trees stood still, their shadows long and thin, and for a moment she thought she saw something. A flicker, a shape, too tall to be a person, too still to be alive. It was gone when she blinked, swallowed by the night, but the feeling stayed, heavy and cold. "There's nothing there," she said into the phone, her voice shaking just a little, and the man laughed, a soft, rolling sound that made her stomach twist. "Oh, it's there," he said, "and it's been waiting." The line clicked, and the dial tone returned, buzzing loud in her ear. Clara hung up fast, her fingers trembling as she stepped back from the wall. She told herself it was nonsense, that voices didn't know things they shouldn't, that shadows didn't wait. She checked the locks, front door, back door, every window, her slippers whispering over the floorboards as she moved. The house felt smaller now, the walls closer, the quiet not so friendly anymore. She poured her tea down the sink, the steam curling up like ghosts, and sat in the living room with the lights on, the phone still in sight. It didn't ring again that night, and she didn't sleep, just watched the windows until the sky turned gray with dawn. When morning came, she unplugged the phone, coiled its cord around it, and shoved it into a drawer, thinking that would be the end of it. But Hollow Bend had other plans, and the night wasn't done with her yet. A week went by, slow and uneventful, the kind of days that blur together in a small town. Clara kept busy, sweeping the porch, stacking firewood, anything to keep her mind off that call. She didn't tell anyone, didn't want the looks or the questions, but she'd catch herself glancing at the drawer where the phone sat, its silence louder than it should have been. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and the air grew thick with dusk, she heard it, a faint ring, muffled but real, coming from the kitchen. Her stomach dropped. She opened a drawer, and there it was, unplugged, cord still wrapped tight, ringing like it was alive. She stood there, hands cold, listening as it went on and on, a sound that didn't belong in her house. She didn't answer it, not that time, but the ringing stopped on its own, and the quiet that followed felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. The next night, it happened again. She was in bed, the covers pulled high, when the ring cut through the dark, soft at first, then louder, pulling her from sleep. She stumbled to the kitchen, her bare feet cold on the floor, and found the phone trembling in the drawer, its bell shaking even without a line to feed it. This time, she grabbed it, yanked it free, and threw it into the backyard, watching it land in the grass under the trees. She locked the door and waited, listening, but the night stayed still. Relief crept in, slow and cautious, and she thought maybe she'd won. But as she turned away, a sound drifted through the window, a voice, faint and familiar, calling her name from the dark. It wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was out there, in the yard, under the trees, where the shadows stretched long. Clara didn't sleep after that. She sat up with a lantern, its glow steady against the walls, and watched the windows until the sun rose. At first light, she went outside, her coat pulled tight, and found a phone where she'd thrown it. The grass around it was flat, pressed down like something heavy had stood there, but the phone itself was untouched, its cord still coiled. She buried it that morning, dug a hole by the shed and covered it with dirt, thinking that would keep it quiet. For a few days it did. The house settled back into its old rhythm, creaks and sighs, the wind through the eaves, and Clara started to breathe easier. But then one night, as she sat by the fire, a sound came from the kitchen, a single, clear ring, sharp as a knife. She checked the drawer. Empty. She checked the yard. The hole was still there, the dirt undisturbed. The ring came again, louder, and she realized it wasn't in the house at all. It was inside her head. Now, Clara lives with it, that voice on the wire that never quite leaves. Sometimes it's a whisper, saying her name when she's alone. Sometimes it's a laugh, soft and knowing, when the night grows deep. She doesn't fight it anymore, just lets it drift through her like the wind, a companion she didn't choose. The town doesn't notice. Hollow Bend keeps its secrets close, and Clara keeps hers closer. Was it a ghost tied to the old phone her grandfather left? A trick of the wires? Some signal crossed with the past? Or something else? Something that found her in the quiet and decided to stay? The answer's out there, maybe, buried with the phone or waiting in the trees. For now, it's just her and the voice, sharing the night. Feel that stillness settle over you, the slow pull of the unknown, and let it carry you toward sleep. Another story waits, just a breath away. Clara stopped checking the windows after a while, but the habit of listening never left her. The voice stayed with her, a soft murmur in the back of her mind, coming and going like the wind through the trees outside. It didn't scare her as much now, just unsettled her. She was knitting in her chair, the needles clicking soft and steady when the noise cut through. At first, she thought she'd bumped it. Maybe her elbow brushed the knob, but the radio sat across the room, untouched. The static hissed and popped, loud enough to make her drop her yarn, and she stood slow, her slippers scuffing the floor as she crossed to it. She turned the dial, expecting a station to come through, maybe the weather report or that preacher who droned on about sin, but nothing cleared, just static, thick and heavy, like a storm trapped in the wires. She twisted the knob back and forth, her fingers cold against the metal, and then she heard it, her name, faint but clear, woven into the noise. "Clara," it said, slow and deliberate, the same voice from the phone now spilling out of the speaker. Her hands froze, and the static pulsed, like it was breathing with her. She pulled the plug from the wall, yanking the cord so hard it left a mark on her palm. The radio went silent, the room still again, but her heart wouldn't slow. She stared at it, that wooden box with its dusty glass dial, and wondered how it could speak without power. The voice had followed her, from the phone to her head, and now to this. She dragged the radio outside, her arms shaking as she carried it to the shed and locked it inside with the rakes and the rustic cans of paint. The night stayed quiet after that, the trees swaying gentle in the breeze, and she sat by the fire until her eyes grew heavy. But when she climbed into bed, the static came back, not from the shed, but from inside her skull, a low hum that buzzed behind her ears. She pressed her hands to her head, willing it to stop, but it wouldn't, and the voice slipped through again, saying, "Listen closer." The next day, Clara went into town, her coat buttoned tight against the chill. Hollow Bend didn't have much, a store, a gas pump, a diner with cracked seats, but she needed noise, people, anything to drown out the hum. She sat at the counter with a cup of coffee, watching old Pete behind the register fiddle with his radio. a newer one with plastic buttons and a long antenna. He grumbled about the signal, said it had been bad all week, cutting in and out with nothing but static. Clara sipped her coffee, the cup warm in her hands, and asked if he'd heard anything strange in it. Voices, maybe, or words. Pete laughed, his voice rough as gravel, and said no, just noise and the occasional hum of a trucker on the highway. She nodded, kept her eyes on the steam rising from her drink, but the static in her head grew louder, sharper, like it didn't like her talking about it. When she left, Pete's radio flickered, and she swore she heard her name crackle through as the door swung shut behind her. Back home, the shed stayed locked, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She avoided the kitchen, the living room, anywhere the voice might find her, and took to sitting on the porch with a blanket, watching the sky turn from gray to black. The static followed her there, a constant buzz she couldn't outrun, and the voice came more often now. Short words, soft phrases, like it was testing her. "Look up," it said one night, and she did, her eyes tracing the stars through the bare branches. Nothing moved, nothing stood out, but the air felt thick, heavier than it should have been. "Under the floor," it whispered another time, and she glanced down at the porch boards, her stomach twisting at the thought of what might be beneath. She didn't dig, didn't pry. She just listened, letting the words drift past like leaves on a stream, hoping they'd tire of her and fade away. One morning, she found a note on the kitchen table, written in her own handwriting, but not her words. It said, "Tune to 88.3, and nothing else. She didn't remember writing it, didn't remember even picking up a pen, but there it was, the ink still wet, the paper torn from her grocery list. Her hands shook as she read it again, the static humming loud in her ears, and she knew it wasn't a dream. She went to the shed, unlocked it slow, and pulled the radio out, dust clinging to her fingers as she carried it back inside. She plugged it in, the cord clicking into the wall, and turned the dial to 88.3, her breath shallow as the speaker hissed to life. Static poured out, thick and alive, and then the voice came clear, not just her name this time, but a sentence, slow and calm. "They're coming for you," it said, and the static swallowed it whole, leaving her staring at the radio as the room grew cold.